Welcome to this online lesson on protest and change between 1963 and 1970. The Black Panthers. The aims of this lesson are to know what the Black Panthers did, to compare interpretations or opinions of the Black Panthers, and to evaluate these interpretations of the Black Panthers. Firstly, a do now task. You may be familiar with this word. Militant, to use confrontational violence in support of a cause. Think about the military, they're often involved in fighting too. Here's your question. Is it ever okay to take the law into your own hands? Give that some thought and pause the video while you write down your responses. Well, for fear of giving too many opinions, I'm not going to answer whether it's ever right to take the law into your own hands, but I suppose it might be based upon your interpretation as to whether a law is just or not. However, the fact is that the Black Panthers were prepared to do this at times, but they felt very provoked, and what they were doing was very much in response to a failure of civil rights campaigns to actually improve the lives of many ordinary black people within their communities. So let's find out a little bit more about the Black Panthers. First of all, you might be familiar with the Marvel Comics character, Black Panther. You might think, therefore, that the Black Panther Party inspired that character, or maybe that the character inspired the Black Panthers. Well, certainly the character appeared before the party, so it may just simply be a coincidence and there might not be any relationship between them at all. But it is interesting, isn't it, that the Black Panther character of the Marvel Comics group, which of course more recently has been made into a film, sort of sums up that sense of pride in black and interest in both black culture and original African culture that would have been related to many of the ancestors of black people in America. And it was quite proud of that as a comic, and it still is to this day. It has its own identity. So coincidence or not, it's an interesting point. So how likely is there a connection? I'll leave that down to you. The Black Panthers themselves then. Some black communities understandably argue that despite the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, state and city governments were not providing black communities with some pretty basic facilities. These included adequate law enforcement, and police brutality was common at this time as well, and protection from crime. Black officials to support black people. Adequate sanitation. This is kind of all related to cleanliness, sewers, rubbish collection, etc. Adequate black education and support for the poor and unemployed. They started to organise and provide these things themselves. And that's really what the Black Panthers are mostly about. It's about providing community services that otherwise were not being provided. So first of all, what problems were there in black communities? How might black communities try to solve these issues? And then thirdly, remember the American West topic? Well, if you're not doing it, then you definitely won't. But if you have done the American West topic, how might this situation lead to vigilantism? Alright, I'll leave you with those questions. You can pause the video now, press play when you're ready to continue. I'm sure that you've identified the several problems that were existing in black communities at this time. So how might they try and solve them? Well, in terms of law enforcement, they might try to work with the police or indeed intimidate them into not being quite so brutal. There's also about getting black officials to support black people. If they can't get that, they might set up their own councils. Also, if they won't sort out issues of sewers and rubbish collection, then they might try and sort these things out for themselves, and the same with education and support for the poor and unemployed. How about the link to vigilantism then? Well, vigilantes in the American West were those who took the law into their own hands. When people committed crimes, they might put them on trial and even execute them without having a proper official trial. They were completely unconnected to the likes of US Marshals and sheriffs and the more federally backed law enforcement agencies. So there might be a link here. Because there was so little trust, and I think understandably so, between the police and the black communities, particularly the black communities and their feelings towards the police, then they might choose to take law enforcement into their own hands if they cannot trust the police to do a fair job themselves. And this really is what the Black Panther Party and the Black Panther movement has become far more famous for. Here's a picture of two Black Panthers in typical Black Panther uniforms, with the black berets, the leather jackets, and indeed the open carry of firearms. That would be a pretty weird idea in the United Kingdom, and it's a reasonably weird idea in America as well, but it is legal in many states. So, this is what the Black Panthers actually did. They patrolled black neighbourhoods to keep them safe, and they often did this armed. They created rainbow coalitions to stop non-white gangs fighting each other. It was the idea that non-white gangs should not be fighting each other, they should be uniting against a common enemy. They controlled the traffic around schools where kids have been hit by cars. And they pressed white officials for improvements such as street lighting. They taught courses on black history and citizens' rights. And they carried guns for self-defence and tape recorders to record police harassment. They also provided free medical clinics for the poor and provided shoes. They ran breakfast clubs for poor black children. Many of these things are not at all militant and others are. So let's consider these categories. Place the bullet points on the left under the following headings. Black pride, so anything that's to do with taking pride in their black heritage and traditions and culture. Social support, anything that helps people. And intimidation, anything that's designed to scare people who are against them. Secondly, how do the activities of the Black Panthers reflect the wider idea of black power? If you've not done the lesson on black power, you might want to revisit that before you attempt that question. Explain your answer using a point example explain and a linked sentence back to this idea of black power. Pause the video now while you complete that. Okay, let's go through the bullet points. Patrolling black neighbourhoods was really about intimidation, but there was a certain amount of social support involved with that too. The creation of rainbow coalitions as well was more about black pride and social support, but probably mostly about social support, preventing these communities from clashing. Controlling traffic was very much social support, as was pressing white officials for improvements. Teaching black history lessons and citizens' rights lessons was about social support, but carrying guns for self-defence was more about intimidation. Providing free medical clinics and breakfast clubs, though, were very much about social support. You should recognise that you've got the most factors under social support, which shows in some ways that the Black Panthers are open to being misunderstood. How about the activities affecting this wider view of black power? Well, the Black Panthers were very much about black people looking after themselves, and so this idea of being proud of their traditions and culture really runs through what they were all about and their identity. So there are some big links with the Black Power movement here. We're now going to look at some interpretations of the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers were misunderstood. They were only trying to provide black communities with the protection that the government wouldn't give them. Then on the other hand, the Black Panthers actually hurt the civil rights campaign. By intimidating white officials, the Black Panthers made positive change less likely, not more likely. So your interpretation tasks. Write down those two interpretations in your own words to really prove that you understand them. Then secondly, which interpretation do you agree with more, based upon the information that we studied so far at least? And thirdly, explain why you agree with that interpretation using a quick peel paragraph. Remember, that means point. I agree with the interpretation. An example that shows this meant, and this means I agree with the interpretation because. Pause the video while you complete those tasks. It'll probably take you about 10 minutes. Okay, hopefully we've got a handle on these two interpretations now. We're going to look at some more detailed versions of those same views. Interpretation number 1. This is typical of an interpretation that you might find in the Paper 3 exam. This is from the Civil Rights Movement 2004 by historian Mark Newman. He is considering the effects of the Black Power movement. In some ways a continuation of the Civil Rights Movement's concerns, and in others a departure from them. Black Power divided national and civil rights coalitions, alienated white supporters, destroyed SNCC, decimated, which means ruined, CORE, produced a range of competing visions, and fanned an already advanced white reaction against black demands for the substance of actual equality. Black Power was part of a new wave of black nationalism which boosted black pride, consciousness and identity, but enjoyed little success politically. Okay, that first interpretation. Which of the interpretations does it better fit from the previous one? Does it better fit the idea that the Black Panthers were misunderstood, or that they did more harm than good? Make your mind up now. Okay, really this one is arguing that they did more harm than good. So presumably the next one is about them being misunderstood. Let's have a look. Interpretation 2 is from We ain't what we ought to be. The black freedom struggle from emancipation I'll read that again. I made a right mess of that. From We Ain't What We Ought to Be, The Black Freedom Struggle from Emancipation to Obama. Published in 2010 by historian Stephen Tuck. He is considering the effects of the Black Power movement. Most Black Power groups combined racial pride and political goals. Many focused on the poor, condemned middle-class black leaders, and called for reparations, which means compensation payments to be paid for slavery, and identified with non-white protest abroad. I'll give you an example of that. Things like the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. These Black Power groups had plenty of slogans, but they went far behind posturing, in other words, doing things for effect. Black Power was often entirely practical when applied to a particular place at a particular moment. Revolutionary trade union movement demanded more black jobs and black representatives in decision making. Black Power student groups demanded more black faculty members. That means teaching staff, and better treatment of black staff, and courses on black history. Now, it's worth pointing out that Interpretation 2 doesn't name the Black Panthers by name, but instead it does mention many of the functions that the Black Panthers themselves carried out. Therefore, you should have identified that it really better fits the idea that the Black Power movement, and in particular in our case the Black Panthers, were more misunderstood. On the next screen, we're going to be having a look at some exam-style questions based upon these interpretations. Now, a quick warning. Remember, dealing with interpretations is different to dealing with sources. You are not here to say that Mark Newman or Stephen Tuck are both biased. We're here to look at what part of history they're looking at, what their focus is, and why they might be focusing on that particular part of this issue. We're not here to say that, oh, they were written many years after the event and therefore they're unreliable. Definitely not the idea with this, so instead try and look at the content of them, the focus of them, and work out why they're looking at that particular part. So, question A. How do interpretations 1 and 2 differ? Here's a writing frame to help you answer it. In interpretation 1 it says, give a quote or a summary, and then say what this means. Then give a quote or a summary of interpretation 2, and explain how that is different. Alright, you shouldn't spend any longer than about 5 minutes on that question, so pause the video now and give it a go. Let's have a look at an example answer. In interpretation 1, it says Black Power enjoyed little success politically. This means that it did not actually change the law or the mind of the government. However, interpretation 2 says they went far beyond posturing. This is a different view because it suggests that while Black Power movements did emphasise black pride, they actually campaigned for change too. Alright, so that's given you the difference. That'll be 4 marks. Have a look at your own answer, make any improvements that are necessary, and press pause while you do so. Done? Well, let's have a look at question B. Explain why interpretations 1 and 2 differ. In interpretation 1, it gives the view that, and this is because. However, in interpretation 2 is different because, and then the reason it is different to interpretation 1 is, and then you've got to be here explaining the reason it is different by using quotes or examples from the interpretations and concentrating on the focus of the interpretations, not just what they say. And that's a little bit of a different skill to what you've just done. It's not a direct comparison, it's trying to explain what that difference is and why they're different. Alright, you should probably spend between 5 and 6 minutes on this, maybe a little bit longer. So give it some thought. It is more difficult than part A, so give it a go now. Press pause, and then when you're ready to continue, press play. Alright, let's have a look at an example. In interpretation 1, it gives the view that the Black Panthers did more harm than good. This is because it focuses, see, there's the word focus, it focuses on the way that militant black campaigns damaged the previously successful CORE and SNCC organisations. You could also improve this by maybe giving an example of some of the successes that CORE and SNCC had had, maybe like the Freedom Ride movement. However, interpretation 2 is different because it refers to the civil rights campaigns Black Power contributed to, such as demanding jobs. The reason it is different to interpretation 1 is because it is focused on the similarities of the aims of the Black Power organisations rather than the more famous militant aspects of Black Power. Didn't mean to put that extra full stop at the end there, but you get the idea. Alright, try and improve your own answer if you need to and estimate a mark out of 4. Pause the video while you do so. Finally then, here's an essay question based upon those interpretations. How far do you agree with the view in interpretation 1 that the Black Power movement enjoyed little success politically? Explain your answer using your knowledge of the historical context. Now this would be a 16-mark answer, and its structure is very similar to other 16-mark essays that you might have written. Instead of trying to give a particular view, this time on maybe a historical issue and then showing your knowledge on it, this time the examiner is really assessing your understanding of the interpretations and your ability to show how they might be supported by different evidence and how they might even be challenged by different evidence. So you're going to be saying whether or not you agree with interpretation 1, and then backing that up with evidence, comparing that to interpretation 2, and then coming to an overall conclusion at the end. Now you would get a little bit of help with this, so I'm going to give you some help now. You may use the following in your answer: the Black Panther Party, Stokely Carmichael and SNCC, but you must also use information of your own. So a suggested structure, and this is a very basic version, is this. Firstly, explain examples that support interpretation 1. Now you would need to provide evidence for why that interpretation is explained as it is. Why is it that interpretation is saying that they enjoyed little success politically? Find examples that support that. Then find examples that support interpretation 2. Examples that support this idea that the Black Power movement actually did some good. Then lastly, you can conclude. There will be a certain amount of evaluation and comparison here. Explain how far you agree. Now consider, how far really means, do you agree a lot, to a small extent, to a limited extent, whatever, just be clear. Then compare that to interpretation 2. Why is it that you agree with interpretation 1? Or why is it that you agree with interpretation 2, meaning you disagree with interpretation 1? Whatever you choose, what evidence suggests that your chosen interpretation is the correct one? You'll probably need to spend anything up to about 25 minutes to half an hour on a question of this length, and by all means jot down an answer structure first, just to make sure that you are not going to miss anything. Take some time over it, and good luck. Pause the video now. Okay, how did you get on? Well, I'm afraid there's no time left in this video now to give an example answer on that, but we will just shortly conclude. Finally, sum up the Black Panthers in 1 to 2 sentences. Then explain your own interpretation of their contribution to civil rights. And then record one question you still have, one fact you can still remember, and one feeling you have about the Black Panthers. And what I mean by that is, how do you feel towards what they did for civil rights? It's fine to feel confused about it, and they are quite an unusual part of this cause. Once you finish these basic tasks, you can stop the video because it's over anyway. That's the end of the lesson. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it and found it interesting or found it useful, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. All the best, and I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.